we're getting a historical representation of how Europeans were thinking about that period. My understanding of why he wrote the play was to convey this message of the decline of Moorish power and prestige and the ascension of European power and prestige. Shakespeare conveys through Othello, for the most part, a very noble figure. In fact, the opening of the play has him being approached in a similar setting as Bevington, who's another critic, says. The scene is almost reminiscent of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane when the Roman soldiers come in. And so Othello's men step forward to defend him. And these are all European men, right? So Bevington makes the point that it's almost as if we're supposed to see him as this kind of Christ-like figure, which is a very interesting interpretation, right? Now, you have the Christ-like figure who falls in love with this European, this Italian woman, who loves her with all his heart, who loves her more than he loves himself, so to speak, as I explained earlier, who was undermined by Iago after Iago's systematic expertise in conspiring to get him to believe his wife is cheating on him. And then at the end, he kills her, chokes her, but then kills Iago and ultimately kills himself. So that tragic end isn't, in my understanding, meant to convey a kind of message of empathy and or sympathy for the Moor. You don't come away feeling, or you shouldn't, feeling so much angry at Othello. The greater anger would be for or towards Iago. So ironically, this play is conveying a representation of an African who was honored as a noble figure. Now, where it gets touchy or complicated is you can still look at it and say, yeah, but he's fighting and serving in the interests of the European power elite, which from the perspective of a Moor who's, traditionally Muslim, why would he be trying to serve the interests of the Venetian state? So there's the complexity part of it, right? But it's like, that's what makes the play so rich. Othello is very sensitive. He's very self-conscious about him kind of being out of place, right, in this Venetian society that is both European and Christian. And he's trying to serve the interests of the European Christian kingdom, even as he knows that he's an African and a Muslim, but he's now serving the Venetian state. And one of the presumed rewards of the state was the love and loyalty of Desdemona. And when that love appears to have been negated through adultery, he then basically, succumbs to believing that she had committed adultery, and as a result, takes her life. And he only discovers too late what happened, and that's when he basically kills Iago, and then he kills himself. Iago was, in fact, I think Carew calls him a trickster. Iago represents a trickster figure, which is also found in various traditional African stories of a trickster figure that seeks to trick or undermine the hero or the heroine. And as a result, what is implied is you have to know thyself. Because the more you know yourself, the more at peace you are with yourself, the more you recognize the value of yourself, but the more also you recognize your interconnection and interdependence with everything around you. So you would certainly think through your actions before you do them, which also would include before you would act on taking the life of your spouse based upon what you're hearing from someone who's deliberately trying to undermine or divide you from that which you love. We live in a pigmentocracy. We don't live in a democracy. And that pigmentocracy means that the closer you are to being European in appearance, the more valuable and the more empowered you are in the larger society. Now, why is that? It's because Europeans, for the last 400 years, have been the most dominant force on the planet, arguably, right? Why is that? Because essentially, the decline of African power, Moorish power, results in the ascension of European power in the world. And just as I've said before, you can find periods, as David McRitchie in Ancient and Modern Britons, his book about, actually he was Scottish, but he talks about Britain as a whole. He points out there was a time in British history where the Brits would try to darken their skin so as to better pass for Moors. Why is that a shock? It shouldn't be if you're talking about a period in history when the Moors are in positions of power. So those who have the most power tend to look the most attractive and are seen as having greater value. Whether it's from Moorish Science, right? Where are you going, Satan? I'm going to and fro the world, seeking whom I may devour. Or from the traditional Christian perspective, where they say, Satan's going to and fro the world, seeking whom he may devour and destroy. It's the same principle, the great divide, the divisions. Trying to get humanity to not see our interconnection and interdependence. What the ancient Chemites would have referenced as, for example, ma'at, right? Ma'at, order, balance, harmony. Trying to oppose isfit, which was chaos, okay? That's the same principle. How do you promote unity? You look for the common denominator in the differences. And then you determine whether is this common denominator, we don't have to have the same ritual practices, but if we have the same principles, we can live together in peace. But that's only if I'm not trying to create some justifiable reason to take your stuff. And of course, the plantation system couldn't work unless there was divide and conquer, right? Naim Akbar talks about that. Breaking the chains of psychological slavery. Others, Blassingame talked about it. The late Blassingame was a historian at Yale. But this idea of saying the European Americans on the plantations knew they needed to create divisions amongst the Africans themselves in order to control 200 Africans on a plantation where there were only 6 or 7 European American overseers. You had to have the African population police itself in the interest of the oligarchs. So they played the young against the old, the lighter complexion against the darker complexioned, the field workers against those who worked in the house. If you knew there were differences even in where someone's, I know this one is a Mandingo. So they'd play the Mandingo against somebody else who might have been from Congo, if they even knew that. And initially they would, because the other ones importing these Africans from via the enslavement trade. So, and yes, there was some trade in Africans coming from the African continent. I don't know why people try to argue that there was no enslavement. Yes, there was. But yes, there were also people enslaved where they stood right here. So it's a combination of both, right? But looking to figure out ways to encourage those divisions so as to maintain power and control. The Moors when they made an oath, they took seriously that oath. So if they said, these are the terms of our surrender, or these are the terms of your surrender, you agree to do this, we agree to do that, we will abide by it. And they would, of course, do this in the name of God or in the name of Allah. So the Moors, when they signed treaties or what have you, they took them seriously. What people like Monroe and McCabe were arguing or presenting, and even Robert Ignatius Burns, who actually himself was a Catholic historian who started researching the history of the Moors and basically said, look, the Moors were more honorable in their dealings with the Catholic world at the time than the Catholics were in dealing with the Moors. And the basic foundation of that, of why that was, is this. The Moorish perspective was that Christians, Muslims, Jews were all the people of the book, al-Kitab, which meant I respect you because you believe in the prophet Jesus or Isa. I respect you because you believe in the prophet Moses or Musa, right? They had that connection. Unfortunately, the Catholic Church at the time did not see any value in recognizing Muhammad, right, as a prophet or a significant spiritual figure to be honored, right? And peace be upon all the prophets. So as a result, when Catholics made treaties, if a Catholic monarch made a treaty, and this is what Monroe and others were referencing, it was not uncommon for them then to say, well, let me go to the bishop, or maybe even go to the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, and have them release me of my oath in the name of God so that I can renege on the treaty. We can't concern ourselves so much with those who don't have a conscience. We can only concern ourselves with ourselves and then trust that we can create an environment that encourages others. If they don't have a conscience, they're not going to get one, versus those who have a dormant conscience that needs to be awakened. Because that's when people talk about somebody being dead to the world, people being asleep, right? To me, that notion of being dead to the world means that you're essentially dead to the understanding of yourself. You're not conscious of really who you are, that you are an expression, if you will, a creation of Allah, of God, which means that within you is supposed to be this desire to manifest the highest principles. Because we are truth and falsehood, strangely mixed, there's that constant battle, or there should be, the battle to make sure the higher self always subdues the lower self. And that's something that you can even take away, again, from what happened, in the context of any tragic figure, Othello or anybody else. If the higher self was always in command, then the negative results of the lower self wouldn't happen, because the lower self always has to answer to the higher self, as opposed to the other way around.